Hello everyone and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Coding Ninjas. My name is Ankush and in this video we'll learn about what does a full stack web developer do. Like we'll look at what does the job requirement of a full stack web developer look like. We'll also see what does the salary or compensation the industry provides to a full stack developer, and we'll also look at what does a resume should look of a full stack developer look like, or what does the interview process look like. Right? So we'll discuss about all of these things. This video will be very informative. This video is actually part of our web development series, right? And you can find the link to the complete playlist in the description down below, right? So without further ado, let's begin with this video. So let's just understand what does a full stack developer do, right? So a full stack developer is someone who is expected to work or build the both front end and the back end of your website, right? So let's just understand what a front end is, right? So anything that you as a user interact with on the website is known as the front end of that website. Now what do I mean by that, right? For example, you go on Google, right? There you see a search bar and there is a button, right? So you can basically type in that search bar and you can click on the button to go forward with your search, right? So that whole interface that you see is known as the front end of Google, right? So as a full stack engineer, you are actually expected to know how to build those front end as well, right? Or let's take another great example, that is on Code Studio, right? So on Code Studio, you are allowed to click on problems and then those problems will be redirected to that specific problem, right? And you can read the problem statement, you can write your code in the code editor, then you can click on the button to submit it. So that is actually the front end part of the Code Studio, right? And you as a user can only interact with the front end part, right? You cannot interact with the back end part, right? So that is basically what a front end is, and the full stack developer is actually expected to develop that front end in itself, right? So as I said earlier, that as a full stack developer, you should both know the jobs of a front end developer and a back end developer, right? So as a full stack developer, there are several jobs of front end that you need to know, right? So let's take an analogy of YouTube, right? So we all use YouTube, right? Right now you are watching this video on YouTube. So let's see what all front ends will you have to build as a full stack developer, right? So the first is creating the user interface, also known as UI, right? So basically in this you will be adding different elements, right? So as you can see on YouTube, there is a search bar, then there is a button that searches, there is a subscribe button that you should press, and there is a bell icon, right, to press, right, which notifies you. So as a front end dev, the first key thing you know is how to add the user interface elements, right? And the second part is that you also need to know how to style the content, right? Basically, how when you search for something, how when the results are displayed, what is the styling of those results, or what is basically the theme of your whole website, right? So as you know that on YouTube you have various themes, right? You have the light theme or the dark theme. So that also you need to know how do I style that, right? Or how do the videos look, or where does what go, right? So that is basically the second job, basically styling the content. And the third job is building the logic and managing the state. Now this is a very key task, right? This is where the actual brain power is used, right? So let's say again, right, you are on YouTube and you search for top Valorant clips, right? So you search that in the text bar, right? And on clicking the search button, you need to build that logic that, hey, I need to pull a request for basically top Valorant clips and display them, right? So this whole, like the brain of your site, you also need to manage as a front end dev, right? And you also need to manage it, right? So let's say when you click on that subscribe button, it turns from red to gray, right? So you need to manage that when the subscribe button is not clicked, then it should be displayed as red, and when it is clicked, then the state of the button should change and now it should be displayed as gray, right? So all of these you need to do as a front end part of the full stack developer, right? So for this you can use variety of tools. That is, like, first is the HTML for creating the UI elements, as we discussed, basically the search bar, buttons, icons and all that good stuff. Second would be CSS, basically for adding the styling, right? So basically, as we discussed, that we may have a dark theme, we may have a light theme, right? We also for the same button, for the subscribe button, you have two different types of colors depending on whether they are clicked or not, right? So for that we use CSS. And third is basically the JavaScript, basically for adding the logic behind your application, right? As I said, that when you search for top Valorant clips, it should actually get a request or trigger a request to get all the videos of top Valorant clips, or right, basically if you click a button, then the color should change, or subscribe button, basically the color should change from red to gray, right? So to do this you use JavaScript. right? So, and the final one is that as a front end dev, or basically a full stack dev who is doing the front end part, you should also know a framework, right? So you can know either React, Vue, or Angular, and any of these is fine. These are all JavaScript frameworks basically, and they're essential part of the modern development that we do, right? So be a full stack developer in 2022, you actually need to know one of these frameworks, because these are widely used among different companies, right? Because they provide a systematic type of building your website, right? So they have uniformities which helps a lot while you're building your website. So you need to know either of these frameworks, right? Either of this is fine. Like my personal recommendation would be React, but you can also go with Vue and Angular, right? So this is all what a role of a front end part is in your full stack developer journey, right? You need to just to summarize, you need to know how to create UIs, you need to know how to style those UIs, and you need to add the logic behind the basically your app, and also manage state, right? So these are the responsibilities for the front end part as a full stack developer. Alright, so let's move on to the next phase, which is the backend, right? So as I said, as a full stack developer, you need to have the knowledge of both front end and backend, right? So backend is basically the server side and the database of your website, right? It basically stores and arranges data, and it empowers your front end, right? That is basically what the job of a backend in a website is, right? So to be clear, basically what happens is that front end makes a request, and that request goes to the server, and server responds with the appropriate message that it wants to send, right? So that's basically what the backend does, right? Basically the front end can be asking to fetch some data from the server. So what server would do, that it would make a request to a database to get that data, or maybe the front end wants to post some data or store some data in the database. So that is basically facilitated by the server, and basically the server also communicates with the database itself to basically store and get the data, right? So that is the whole job of a backend, to basically write that server side code, and to basically do operations on the database to fetch data or to post it, right? So that is basically what the backend side of the work is in full stack development, right? And this all is done via the API, that is the application programming interface. It is a very key term, and you should know about this. It is basically what helps the front end and back end to communicate with each other, and then back end communicates with the database on its own, right? So and there are several operations that you can database that are basically known as CRUD operations, right? It basically stands for create, read, update, and delete, right? So those operations are done by the backend on the database, right? So as a backend job, you need to know about the server side programming and the databases. Alright, so coming to the responsibilities as a full stack developer in the backend department, you will be expected to write APIs, right? You will have to basically decide an architecture. The most common architecture is the REST, right? And you will be essentially writing REST APIs, right? There are different types of REST APIs, like basically the an API to get the data, or basically an API to post the data, or put the data, or delete the data. So these are the different APIs that you will be writing as a backend work in your front end journey, in full stack journey, right? And second would be like to store the data or to fetch the data in the database, right? Basically the part where you connect the backend with the database, that also you will have to do as a full stack developer, right, in the backend department, right? So let's take an example for our YouTube only, right? As we said that in our front end part, so let's say we write in the search bar top Valorant clips, right? So that triggers a request. So essentially what is happening there is that the front end will request the backend head that, hey, you know what, get me the top Valorant clips, right? Then the backend will make a request to the database that, you know what, whatever the relevant data is stored about Valorant GIFs, give me that, right? So database will in fact give some data to the basically your backend, and then backend will respond. As a response, will send those clips, right, to the front end, and then the front end will display that, right? So that is basically what happens in this whole web world, right, that you see. It depends completely on the request and response cycle between the front end and the back end, and between the back end and the database, right? So that is what happens, right? So coming to the tools that you will be using as a backend developer, first you need a server-side programming language, obviously, right? So that could be JavaScript. So to write your backend in JavaScript, you need to have Node.js, which is basically a runtime for writing JavaScript with the backend. Other examples could be, you can also use Python, right, using some framework like Django or Flask. You can also use Java using the framework Spring, right? In backend, basically using a framework is an essential requirement, because it really fastens your development, right? So you, as I said, that you can either use basically Node.js or Express.js for JavaScript, or another framework for JavaScript which do you know, right? You can use Flask or basically Django for Python and Spring for Java, right? And you can also use Ruby on Rails. That is also still very relevant in the industry, right? One thing I would not recommend is using PHP in 2022, right? It is a very declining technology, right? Other stuff like JavaScript or Python, they are much faster and they are much widely used in the industry nowadays. So I would recommend preferring those over PHP or any other declining technology, right? Even Ruby on Rails is very good, and Java is also still widely used. Java is basically used in fintech. All the fintech that you see, like the Paytm or basically Credit Avenue and other fintech apps, their backend is actually being powered by Java, right? It has its own pros, right? But yeah, that's about the server languages. And coming to the next, that is the database, right? Where your data is essentially getting stored. You also need to learn a database, right? Now there are two types of databases. There can be SQL databases or NoSQL databases. SQL databases, the example of SQL databases are basically like PostgreSQL or MySQL. You can run any one of this, right? An example of NoSQL database, the most common is basically MySQL. You can also learn Firebase, right? And as a beginner who is starting full stack development, you need to learn only one of these, right? Only one of the both categories, right? You don't need to learn both SQL and NoSQL database. You can either learn any of the one SQL database, or you can learn any of the one NoSQL database, right? So basically the main difference in this is that in SQL databases, the data is stored in forms of rows and columns in a table, right? And in NoSQL databases, the data is stored in form of JSON objects, right? Both have their advantages and disadvantages, but as a beginner, I would recommend to start with any one of them, right? So this was all about backend, basically the job that you need to do in your full stack journey, and basically the tools that are required. Alright, so up till now we have learned about front end and back end. Basically, as a full stack developer, what you will be doing as a front end developer, and what all technologies you need to learn, and as a back end developer, what all you will be doing, and what are the respective technologies that you can learn, right? But as a full stack developer, there are some predefined stacks, right? What do I mean by that? These tech stacks basically cover the whole stack, basically the front end part and back end part as well. And the great thing is that they are easier to learn and they work in great synergy with themselves, right? So one of those stacks is MERN stack. Basically, MERN stack stands for MongoDB for M, Express for E, R for React, and N for basically Node.js, right? So this is basically a JavaScript tech stack, right, where you are using MongoDB as a database, and to power your backend you are using Node.js and Express.js, and to power your frontend you are using React, right? So it is a great option to learn as a beginner, right? I would say that you can build actually great apps in a much faster way, because these are easier to learn, right? So this is definitely a great stack. Another could be the Pern stack, where basically instead of MongoDB we are using Postgres, right? So it's P for Postgres, E for Express, R for React, and N for Node, right? So Postgres, as I told earlier, is a SQL database, right? Basically the difference between MERN stack and Pern stack is only of the database, that in MERN stack you are using a NoSQL database, whereas in Pern stack you are using a SQL database, and both have their disadvantages and advantages, but both are very easy to learn and you can definitely check them out, right? Another can be using Django with React, right? So here basically we are swapping out Express and Node for Django, right? So if you want to power your backend via Python, you can definitely look at Django, and for front end you can look at React, right? And also I would like to mention that as there was MERN stack, there is also MEAN stack, right? Basically here you are still using MongoDB for your database, you are using Express and Node.js for your backend, but instead of React, now you are using Angular for your front end, right? And similarly, like Maven stack also, like basically instead of Angular you use Vue, right? So these are basically the interchangeable stacks that there exist, but you can definitely look at one of them and start learning it, because as I said that they work with great synergy with each other, right? And some other things could be the tools, right? You could also look at learning Git and GitHub, right? Basically this is the version control, and it really helps you a lot in maintaining your code, right? And you can also look at learning Postman, which is to test your APIs, right? So these are some extra skills that you need to learn as a full stack developer, right? Basically choosing a full stack tech stack and these two tools that I mentioned, that is Git and GitHub and Postman, right? These will really outshine you. So up till now we have seen that what does a full stack developer do, what are different phases of it, and what tech stacks can you learn to become a full stack developer, right? But I would like to mention some other things, right, that you can learn that can actually help you become a better full stack developer. These are not necessary, but these are definitely good to have. Like as I said, they will help you become a better full stack developer, or they can be even asked in your interviews, right? A lot of things that I will mention here, these things are readily asked in your interviews, right? But mind this, to begin with full stack web development, you don't, these are not a prerequisite but a good to have, right? But you should definitely pay heed to a couple of these things, right? So first would be data structural algorithms, right? These are essential in today's age, right? So a lot of interviews for the big companies revolve around data structural algorithms because they help you understand basically the complexity of your code, basically the time and space complexity that your code takes, and they also help build your problem solving skills, which is very essential as a full stack developer, because writing code is one thing, but solving a problem via code is another thing, right? And data structural algorithms definitely help building in your problem solving skills, right? Second would be system design, right? So system design is basically designing the designing your system, as the name suggests, right? So this actually helps you in designing, in learning how to design large scale systems. And this is like, if you are good at system design now, you are actually way ahead of your competition, right? This is one of the key skills, and there are a lot of like interviews that are solely based on system design, right? So the system design has two components, that is high level design and low level design. So it is definitely beneficial if you learn these, right? Again, these are not like, you can learn these after you have learned the full stack tech stack, but you should definitely look into it, right? And the third would be basically the computer science fundamentals, like operating systems, computer networks, database management system. Basically in the tech stack, I said that you need to learn a database, right? Basically SQL or NoSQL database. In database management system, I'm essentially asking you to learn the theory behind it, like what is normalization, how to draw an ER diagram, and good stuff like that, right? So you can definitely learn it. And also object oriented programming, that how do classes and objects work, right? So you can actually look at these computer science fundamentals, that these are basically the extra things. These are you can learn these after you have learned full stack development. Basically you have built 2-3 projects, but you should definitely look into these things. And you don't need to learn all of these, like basically a couple of these would also work, but you should definitely look into it. Alright, so by now we have learned what all we need to learn as a full stack developer, and what are some good to have or extra things that you can learn as a full stack developer, right? So let's now move on to the interviews, which is the one of the most exciting part, right? Because like those are what will actually help you facilitate launch into a company where you can actually start contributing via your coding, right? So there are typically 3 types of interviews for a full stack developer, right? First is, as I told in the extra things part as well, right? The first is the data structural algorithms and system design based interviews, right? In this, basically you would be given either a data structural algorithm problem where you will have to solve it under an hour typically, right? And you need to communicate with the interviewer that what are you thinking, why you're thinking that, what is the time and space complexity of your solution, can you optimize that solution, right? And it could be either a system design round, right, where you need to basically design a large scale system basically, right? So that is one type of interview. This is mainly taken by the large corporations, basically the Silicon Valley based companies like Amazon, Google, or basically some other big companies from Europe or Australia like Atlassian, Spotify, and stuff like that, right? So this is one type of interview. Another is basically a take home project, right? Basically a company would give you a take home project to, you know what, build us something like this, right? They would specify the requirements that they want to build, and generally they wouldn't post any restriction on the tech stack, right? You can choose any tech stack of your choice, right? But you need to build a product according to the specification within a span of 2 to 3 days, and then if they like that, they will proceed with further interviews where you will be discussed on your choices, why you chose this tech stack, and how did you build this, how how did you overcome the challenges that you faced while building this, right? So these are the second types of interviews, which is basically the take-home project types, right? And the third is the hybrid, right? So this is a mix of stuff, right? Basically they can have DSA based questions or system design based questions, and they can also have like tech specific questions, right? So let's say you are applying for a front end developer, so they might ask you questions on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Or basically if the position is for a .NET developer or a React developer, right? So they will basically ask questions related or specific to the technology along with some data structural algorithms question or basically your past experiences, right? So these are the third type of hybrid interviews, right? And these are generally the three types of interviews that you will face as a full stack developer, right? And these are different for different companies. So if I talk about hybrid interviews, right? So in ShareChat I faced this type of interview. That first round was data structural algorithms based, and the second round was for basically JavaScript centric, that he asked me a lot of stuff. He dig deep into JavaScript, that how closures work, how currying works and stuff like that. And he also asked me questions on HTML and CSS, right? And in Blinkit also I faced the same type of interview. So different companies have different types of interviews, but it would be either of these three, right? So you can definitely prepare accordingly to the company that you apply. Alright, so now that we have talked about basically the work that you do as a full stack developer, what all stuff that you need to learn as a full stack developer, what are the interviews like of a full stack developer, let's come to the compensation of the salary part, right? This is very exciting, and this can be like a motivation for you, right? So since as a full stack developer you will be wearing many hats, you will be doing several roles, right? So the compensation is fairly good as well, right? So for a fresher the average compensation is 6.6 lakhs per annum, right? And it can go up to 17-18 lakhs, right? And if you talk about the big firms like Amazon, Google, or even like Atlassian, or good startups like ShareChat, Blinkit, they pay upwards of 20, 30, even 40 lakhs for a fresher, right? And if you have experience, like you have been in the industry for 5-6 years, you have worked on big products and you have created great impact, right? And you are a good engineer overall, right? Your compensation can actually be up to 70-80 lakhs or even 1 crore per annum, right? So full stack development in terms of compensation is really great. It is and it is even growing, right? So this full stack web development industry is definitely growing year on year and will grow, right? Because as you've seen that in future there will be, all businesses will have a tech angle, right? And a tech angle means that your business will either have a website, right? And full stack web developers build the website itself, right? So definitely in terms of salary, compensation, and job opportunities, it is a really cool place to be, right? And if I talk about jobs, right, there are more than 10,000 jobs only alone on LinkedIn that are active right now for freshers, right? For basically 0 to 2 years of experience, right? So there's no scarcity of jobs in this field, right? And it is growing year on year, right? So definitely in terms of salary, compensation, and basically the growth of your career, full stack web development holds its ground. It is really good and you can definitely consider it. Alright, so by now we have seen what a full stack web developer does, what all you need to prepare for it, what are the interviews like, what is the career opportunity, the growth opportunity, and salaries like, right? So let's now talk about your resume, right? What should your resume look like, right? So a resume should first of all have, if you have done any prior internship or any freelance work, it should definitely have that, and you should actually describe it, basically the duration for which you did it, what tech stack you used, what was the impact you created, right? So let's say if you build the front end or the back end for the site, you should mention that what did you build, what tech stack you used, and like what does it serve, like how many people does it serve. If you have that metrics, you should definitely mention that. Other could be that you mention your technical skills, basically the tech stack or the programming languages that you know, right? So for example, if you are a merge stack developer, you can definitely mention all that good stuff, that I know MongoDB, Express, or React, right? And if you are if you have worked on Ruby on Rails, you can mention that. If you have worked on Django, you can definitely mention Python and Django, right? So another could be that you mention the tools that you know how to use, right? So basically you could mention, as I said, Git and GitHub, Postman, or if you have interacted with Jira or ClickUp services like this, you can definitely mention that you know I am familiar with these tools, right? Because these are actually used in the software industry on a day-to-day basis, right? Another one could be that you mention your project, right? The personal projects that you have built, and I have already made a video on the 7 types of projects that you can build for your resume. If you're applying for a full-time roles, you should definitely mention basically one intermediate level project and one boss level project, right? You can definitely check the video on 7 web development projects that you can build, right, on our coding channel, right? That is definitely great. And you can also mention your achievement, right? Let's say if you really do competitive programming and you had a very good round in some competitive contest, you can definitely mention the rank that you got in the contest and how many participants were there. You can also mention basically your rankings on different platforms, your rating on different platforms, right? And you can also mention if you readily go for hackathons, you can mention if any hackathon that you had a good position, like basically first, second, or third, or basically any open source contribution that you did. You can definitely mention all of these things on your resume, right? So that you have a higher chance of getting a callback or an interview, or basically getting selected, right? Because through recruiter's eyes, you are not what he sees, right? He sees your resume first, and then they follow up based on your resume that they want to give you a chance to interview or not, right? So having a good resume is definitely a key in cracking those full stack developer roles, right? So this was it for what all you need to be there in your resume, right? So this is it for this video, right? So in this video, we definitely, to summarize what we discussed that what a full stack developer does. It handles basically the front end and back end both, right? We discussed what all technologies you need to learn for front end, right? Basically you need to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript essentially, and you can also learn a framework which can be like basically React, Vue, or Angular based on the tech stack that you choose, right? You need to learn a backend you need to learn about backend also, right? You need to learn a server-side language and a database, right? And again, it would depend on the tech stack that you use. And the tech stack that we discussed were basically Merge Stack, Punch Stack, or Django with React, or React with Firebase, right? And we also discussed some extra things that you can learn, right? Those are definitely data structural algorithms, system design, computer science fundamentals like OOPS, OS, DBMS, computer networks, and stuff like that. And we also saw that what are the different types of interviews, right? Basically, there are DSA based interviews, there are system design based interviews, there are take home projects type of interviews, and they are basically a hybrid of these, right? And then we also saw the salary, right? Obviously salary is a great part of this role. And then we saw all the stuff that you need to have in your resume, right? So that was it for this video. If you liked it, do click the like button, do share it with your friends, do comment down below the future videos that you want from us, or what you liked about this video, or any feedback that you have for this video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel of Coding Ninjas. My name is Ankush, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.